On the night of October 14, 2008, a 911 dispatcher in Cedar Falls, Iowa received a call that would haunt the department for over a decade. The voice on the other end belonged to 19-year-old Melissa Hartley, a part-time babysitter and community college student. Her words were frantic, barely coherent, spoken in a whisper that the dispatcher had to strain to understand. "There's someone in the house," she said. "Please, I have the kids. I don't know what to do." And then, just 47 seconds into the call, the line went dead. When police arrived at the Morrison residence on Willow Creek Drive 11 minutes later, they found the front door wide open, 2 children asleep in their beds completely unharmed, and absolutely no trace of Melissa Hartley. She had vanished into the cold October night as if she had never existed at all. What happened in those 11 minutes? Where did Melissa go? And who, if anyone, was actually inside that house with her? These questions would remain unanswered for 12 long years, until a renovation crew working on that very same house made a discovery behind the walls of the basement that would crack this case wide open and reveal secrets that nobody in Cedar Falls could have ever anticipated. But before we get there, you need to understand who Melissa Hartley really was, because the story the media told about her back in 2008 barely scratched the surface of this young woman's complicated life. Melissa grew up on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, in a modest 2-bedroom home on Archer Road that she shared with her mother, Diane, and her younger brother, Tyler. Her father, Richard Hartley, had left the family when Melissa was just 7 years old, disappearing to start a new life somewhere in Nevada. He never sent money. He never called on birthdays. For all practical purposes, Melissa grew up without a father, and by all accounts, this absence shaped her in profound ways. Teachers at Cedar Falls High School remembered Melissa as quiet but observant. She wasn't the type of girl who demanded attention in the classroom, but she had a way of watching people, studying them, that some found unsettling. Her English teacher, Margaret Donovan, later told investigators that Melissa had an almost obsessive habit of writing. She carried a small leather journal with her everywhere she went, scribbling notes during lunch, between classes, even during lectures when she thought no one was watching. "She was documenting something," Mrs. Donovan said during her interview. "I always wondered what she was writing about, but she never let anyone see those pages." After graduating in 2007, Melissa enrolled at Hawkeye Community College to study psychology. She told her mother she wanted to understand why people did the things they did, why they hurt each other, why they lied, why they left. But college was expensive and financial aid only covered so much. So Melissa picked up babysitting jobs around the neighborhood to make ends meet, building a small but loyal clientele of families who trusted her implicitly with their children. The Morrison family was one of her regulars. David and Karen Morrison lived in one of the nicer subdivisions in Cedar Falls, in a 2-story colonial-style home with a manicured lawn and a privacy fence surrounding the backyard. David worked as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company, which meant frequent travel. Karen was a real estate agent whose evening showings often ran late. They had 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Lucas, and they needed reliable childcare at least 3 or 4 nights a week. Melissa started babysitting for the Morrisons in the spring of 2008 and quickly became their go-to sitter. Karen Morrison would later describe Melissa as perfect. She was punctual, responsible, and the kids absolutely adored her. Emma, in particular, had taken to Melissa like an older sister, and the two would spend hours playing board games or reading stories together in Emma's bedroom. There was never any indication that anything was wrong, never any red flags, never any reason to suspect that this arrangement would end in tragedy. But here's where things start to get strange. In the weeks leading up to October 14th, Melissa's behavior began to change. Her mother, Diane, noticed it first. Melissa had become withdrawn, spending more time alone in her room, declining invitations to family dinners, and checking her phone obsessively at all hours of the night. When Diane asked what was wrong, Melissa brushed her off with vague excuses. School stress, exhaustion, normal stuff, but it wasn't normal and Diane knew it. On October 10th, just 4 days before she disappeared, Melissa made an uncharacteristic request. She asked her brother Tyler, who was 16 at the time, if she could borrow his hunting knife. Tyler found this odd because Melissa had never shown any interest in outdoor activities or weapons of any kind. When he asked why she needed it, she simply said, "Protection." She didn't elaborate, and Tyler, not wanting to pry, handed over the knife without further questions. He would spend years regretting that decision. Then there was the phone call on October 12th. Melissa's best friend, a girl named Jenna Castellanos, received a call from Melissa at 11:47 p.m. Jenna was already half asleep when her phone rang, but something in Melissa's voice made her sit up straight. Melissa was crying, though she was trying to hide it. "If something happens to me," she said, "I need you to know it wasn't an accident." Before Jenna could respond, before she could ask what on earth Melissa meant by that, Melissa hung up. Jenna tried calling back immediately, but Melissa didn't answer. She texted her multiple times over the next 2 days, but Melissa's responses were short, dismissive, and completely out of character. "I'm fine. Don't worry about it. Talk soon." They never did talk again. On the evening of October 14th, 2008, David Morrison was in Minneapolis for a 3-day conference, and Karen had back-to-back showings scheduled until at least 9 o'clock. Melissa arrived at the Morrison residence at 5:30 p.m., just as she always did. Karen gave her the usual rundown. Dinner was in the fridge, bedtime was 8:30 for both kids, and she'd be home by 10 at the latest. Karen remembered that Melissa seemed distracted that evening, quieter than usual, but she chalked it up to midterm stress and didn't think much of it. The Morrison children ate dinner, watched an hour of television, and were in bed by 8:45 p.m. Emma would later tell investigators that Melissa had seemed jumpy that night, checking the windows multiple times and asking Emma if she had heard any strange noises. Emma said no, that everything seemed normal to her, and Melissa had tucked her in with a smile and told her everything was going to be okay. At 9:23 p.m., Melissa Hartley dialed 911. The call was brief, just 47 seconds, but the audio recording would be analyzed hundreds of times in the years that followed. In the background, investigators could make out what sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate, somewhere on the first floor of the house. Melissa's breathing was rapid, panicked. "There's someone in the house," she repeated twice. "I have the kids. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom. Please hurry." The dispatcher asked her to stay on the line, assured her that officers were on the way, but Melissa didn't respond. There was a sound, something between a gasp and a muffled scream, and then nothing but silence. When police arrived at 9:34 p.m., they found a scene that made no logical sense. The front door was standing wide open, but there were no signs of forced entry anywhere on the property. The children were still asleep in their beds, completely undisturbed. The bathroom where Melissa claimed to have locked herself was empty, with no signs of struggle. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her car keys still inside. Her vehicle, a 2002 Honda Civic, was parked in the driveway exactly where she had left it. Melissa Hartley was simply gone. Police searched the house from top to bottom that night and found nothing. No blood, no signs of violence, no evidence that anyone other than Melissa and the children had been inside. The 911 call suggested an intruder, but where was the proof? Had Melissa imagined the whole thing? Had she staged her own disappearance? Or had something far more sinister occurred, something that left no trace behind? For 12 years, investigators chased dead ends and false leads, and the case grew cold. The Morrison family eventually moved away, unable to live with the memories. The house sat empty for years before new owners purchased it in 2019 and decided to renovate the basement. That's when construction workers tore open a section of drywall and discovered a small metal box hidden between the studs. And inside that box was Melissa Hartley's journal, the one she had carried everywhere, the one nobody had ever been allowed to read. What was written on those pages would change everything investigators thought they knew about that night, because Melissa hadn't been afraid of a stranger breaking into the house. She had been afraid of someone who already had a key. #the babysitter who disappeared after calling 911. Police found her diary hidden in the walls 12 years later. Part 2. The pages that spoke from the grave. Welcome back. If you haven't watched part 1, I strongly suggest you go back and watch it first, because what I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about the disappearance of 19-year-old Meredith Caulfield. When we left off, contractors renovating the old Whitmore house in Cedar Falls, Iowa, had just discovered a leather-bound journal hidden between the wall studs of an upstairs bedroom. A journal that had been entombed in that wall for 12 years. A journal written by a young woman who vanished on the night of October 14, 2009, after making a frantic 911 call that ended in a scream. But here's where this case transforms from a missing persons investigation into something far more sinister. Detective Marcus Webb, now retired, received the call about the diary on March 3, 2021. He had worked Meredith's case from the beginning, had interviewed dozens of witnesses, had chased down countless dead-end leads. The case had haunted him for over a decade. When he heard what those contractors had found, he drove 90 miles to see it with his own eyes. The diary contained entries spanning from January 2009 to October 12, 2009, just 2 days before Meredith disappeared. And what those pages revealed was a systematic documentation of terror that no one in that quiet college town ever suspected. Meredith had been babysitting for the Whitmore family for nearly 8 months when she started keeping the journal. The family consisted of Gerald Whitmore, a 47-year-old financial advisor, his wife Patricia, and their 2 children, Emma, age 6, and Tyler, age 4. By all outward appearances, they were the perfect American family. Gerald coached Little League. Patricia volunteered at the church. Their home was always immaculately maintained. But Meredith's diary painted a vastly different picture. The first entries were mundane schedules, notes about the children's bedtimes, favorite snacks, which cartoons they liked to watch. But by March of 2009, the tone shifted dramatically. Meredith began documenting what she called the strange occurrences at the Whitmore house. On March 14th, she wrote, "Found Mr. Whitmore standing in the hallway outside the kids' room at 2 a.m. He said he was checking on them. But he wasn't looking at their room. He was looking at me. On April 2nd, the cameras. I finally noticed them today. There are cameras everywhere in this house, even in the guest bathroom where I change. When I asked Mrs. Whitmore about them, she pretended she didn't know what I was talking about. On April 19th, he knows my schedule, my class schedule at the university.